joining us today for our virtual event, Spika Speaker Series with James Hall. He's the principal and founder of ZEB Tech, and today we're going to talk about how to train for the bus, the zero-emission bus. I'm Bekhi Spika. I'm the Vice President and Chief Revenue Officer here at Spika Design and Manufacturing. And James and I met at the APTA Expo in 2023. So James, thanks so much for joining us. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. As you said, I am James Hall. I am the founder and principal of ZEB Tech. We are a specialized workforce development consultancy that's focused on zero-emission transportation and helping transit agencies transition to a zero-emission fleet. So my background is long and complicated, so I'll try and sum it up as quickly as possible. I actually started my career as a technician in the automotive industry. So I was a diagnostic technician at Toyota, focusing on electrical diagnostics at the time. That was my specialty. Around 2009, maybe a little bit earlier than that, I want to say, is when the automotive industry started to kind of experience a bit of a fallout. And it was difficult to really just make sure I was making ends meet. So I found a listing at WMATA here in DC for an electromotive technician, which essentially was just a fancy way of saying I was working on the subway cars. So I got a chance to get in and start working on those rail cars in the subway and working at Metro. I really enjoyed it, and I found myself kind of teaching others from time to time just on the shop floor. Well, a friend of mine that also worked there was working in the training department at the time, and he mentioned that there were openings, and they were trying to get people to apply to it. I found the posting. I applied. I got a chance to interview, and luckily I got hired for it. And from there, I just kind of started to take off when it came to training and workforce development. It was one of those things where I bridged this need to be able to just kind of work on and start repairing things, and then bring that together with, kind of helping people understand how to do the same thing. Just for myself and any other trainer out there, I feel like they can sort of empathize with this, or at least they feel very similarly. And the idea that when you see a student have that light bulb moment, just ting, I get it now. That's one of the best feelings. And so that's what motivated me, and still continues to motivate me in what I do now. So from Proterra, or I went to Proterra next from WMATA. Proterra was an excellent opportunity for me. I got a chance to take a look at their battery electric buses and understand a little bit more about what was going on with those subsystems. There was an opportunity when I joined them to really just kind of build out the entire training program there. So I had the chance to sort of hire everybody that they have in now, design their curriculum, really put them on a roadmap that they're following. And it was a lot of exciting and just kind of fun opportunities there. From there, I transitioned to the International Transportation Learning Center, where I had a chance to work with the Zero-Emission Bus Maintenance Training Standards Committee through APTA, and then we issued the ZEB training standards that are currently available. We put together a BEB familiarization course that's available to everyone in the industry. There's a ton of work that we accomplished in a very short amount of time, and I got to say it was a great experience being there. But from my standpoint, I really found myself constantly just wanting to engage with everyone that was asking for help. And when you're working for someone else, it's really difficult to really open up sort of the floodgates of what you can do for others. You have to sort of work through their lens. And I was just, in that position where I decided I really want to get out there and kind of do more and help more people. So ZEB Tech came around, and this is where I am.
So with ZEB Tech, I'm just curious, what is a typical event like for you? You go on site to see transit agencies for a few days. Tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. So one of the projects that I'm working on right now is it's a fleet transition plan. So myself and a group of other consultancies are working together to help Flint, Michigan, Flint MTA plan out their transition to a zero-emission fleet. My aspect really is focused around the FTA Task 6 or Element 6, which is planning for the workforce development piece. I love this part, honestly, the most because I'm the kind of person that I just love to get out and meet new people, chat with them. Obviously, as I'm, talking here, this is just so much fun to me. So, this gives me the opportunity to get on site and start seeing more of these agencies, and I get a chance to chat with people, find out where they want to go, usually to start, where they are right now, some of their challenges, a lot of their successes, and that's one of the best parts too. Is I get a chance to meet people that have led so many different programs, and they're excited to talk about it. Everybody in transit is always so proud of their work, and I honestly love it for that reason. So Flint MTA was, my last example, and I actually just got back from Flint last night. It was great being there. I got a chance to chat with everyone and really understand more about where their technicians are, where their drivers are in relation to transitioning to a zero emission fleet. They're still very early in their adoption, but their plan is pretty much already in place. It's great when I get to come in and say, "You've done so much fantastic work. You've pretty much established the framework for what you really need to do, and then here are the small gaps to sort of fill in the rest of the way." So, for example, right now they're planning on utilizing an LMS and starting to launch that. One of the things that they're running into at the moment is trying to figure out who will manage the LMS, whether or not they have the right staffing. And so I get to come in and strategize with them around, the best ways to deal with those challenges, or if there's a gap that maybe has existed that they weren't aware of when putting that plan together. That's kind of where I get to come in and help them address those gaps and fill in, really those gaps with whatever needs they have.
Sure. We were chatting just a little bit, obviously, before we started speaking today about how information is shared across all these transit agencies. And obviously what we're doing today is one of the efforts to get information out there, best practices and challenges that other people are facing. And obviously in your business, right, you're there to help promote and cross-pollinate best practices and to just help bridge all the gap in information. What else is available to folks going through this?
Right now, there's surprisingly a lot. I say surprisingly a lot because we're honestly still in the infancy stages of adopting any zero emission vehicles to these fleets. There aren't really a lot of large agencies that have gone completely zero emission yet. So to that point, we're maybe, I'd say, a quarter of the way there if we're looking at making that transition. At least another 10 to 15 years off before we have everything in place. But there's a lot out there as far as new technologies. You have augmented reality and virtual reality starting to be integrated just about everywhere, which is lovely. Granted, I'm saying everywhere in the sense that broader than transit when it comes to training. But with transit, there's still some new adopters that are coming in. That said, there are other courseware development companies that are out there right now that have sort of been leading the way with development of these programs. So I've used Immerse Technologies as a name drop before. XPan is another one. They're based out of Canada. They do fantastic work as well. Both of those companies are really well suited to really step in and address some of the challenges of training your workforce when you can't necessarily take them away from their job, right? So that's one of the things that started is you've had augmented reality and virtual reality start to be integrated into the training. There's a lot more that's being developed with training aids as well, since we have new technologies like the battery electric buses that are out there. We have hydrogen fuel cell buses. Propane isn't necessarily zero emissions, but it is a low emission. That's been around for a little while, but there's a ton of training aids that are starting to come around for those vehicles as well. And then you have more people that are starting to come around when it comes to being subject matter experts. They finally have had the chance to get into the equipment and work with it enough that they can start to tell others about what they've experienced. They can write it down. They can translate their knowledge to whatever media needs to be used and rolled out for others to be able to learn.
This, my understanding is that in the transit world, as in many industries, there's a lot of turnover with the staff. And that just ties in so much into a good training plan and the requirement of one so that it's really successful with getting people up to speed as there is this turnover.
Right. We're working on addressing the retention issue in transit now. One of the programs that I at least had a little bit of an opportunity to connect with when I was at ITLC was addressing their recruitment and retention plan. Yes, that is a huge challenge everywhere too. We're just seeing that a lot of the times people are coming in for a year or two. They kind of have a project that they're working on. Especially if you're office personnel, there's one thing that you'd like to accomplish, or you're just looking for something to pay the bills for a bit. What I've seen really make big impacts, though, is that when you have transit agencies that have started to invest in their workforce and show that you have a career path or a career progression, right?
Yeah.
This was something that was brought up in conversation recently as well, and since I was at Flint, we were also chatting about that. The idea that you can come in and be a driver, and if you want to be a driver and be one of the best drivers, awesome. Nobody is going to fault you for that, and that's absolutely admirable. You know exactly where you want to be, you know what you like to do, and you want to be good at it. Wonderful. What if you want to do more than that? What if coming in as a driver was just kind of your foot in the door opportunity? Where do you go from that? And if you don't know, it's kind of demoralizing at a point where you're like, I want to do something more, and I just don't know how to get into that point. So putting together a good path for career progression, and then finding out a way that you can sort of show overlap. As I've taken these classes, as I've gone through this training, as I've learned more, I can pursue different career paths because I have these qualifications. You know, I was already qualified in this position. If I'm interested in doing something from like a scheduler standpoint, or if what I'd like to be a supervisor, can I continue to progress past that? Where exactly can my career take me if I take the right training? So we found that from a retention standpoint, that absolutely has a big impact. If you can see where you can start, where you can go, and if you make the training accessible, everybody, people will typically stick around.
Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of some of what the transit agencies are facing. I'm going to start with the question, what are the main differences between conventional bus fleets and zero-emission bus fleets, especially with respect to preparing a workforce for the zero-emission bus fleet?
Sure. So to start with the fleets, well, the diesel engine is pretty much gone at this point. We're looking at transitioning to some sort of electric propulsion. So whether it be battery electric or whether it be hydrogen fuel cell, it's kind of where we are when it comes to zero emissions at the moment. There are other technologies out there, they just haven't made it into transit. For example, Class 7 and Class 8 trucks are utilizing not a hydrogen fuel cell, but a hydrogen powered engine. So, you know, the exhaust would basically be just H2O. When it comes to the actual workforce piece and the training aspect of it, the big difference really is you have a lot of safety that is that's kind of tied to this now. So more than there ever was before, there are safety aspects that need to be trained on. High voltage is a big deal. You need to make sure that people are comfortable around high voltage, number one, but they also know how to work around it safely, using different PPE than they used to previously. So when you were a technician before, typically your level of PPE was gloves if you needed them, just, you know, your standard latex gloves, or if you needed leather gloves just to kind of have something to hold on to and keep your hands from getting beat up, you would use those. Usually safety glasses and earplugs for a loud environment. That was about it. You didn't really need too much more.
Sure.
Now you need high voltage rubber gloves. You need arc flash kits. You need to understand what certain sensors and alarms are in shops, especially ones that utilize hydrogen. You need to understand the idea of a blast radius. There are other aspects of it as well. And this was something that was brought to my attention that I didn't realize was really trained on. But again, using Flint because it's, most recent in my memory here. One of the ways that they tested for, outside of their sensors, but one of the ways they tested for a hydrogen leak was they used to have a straw broom just kind of hanging on the fence. And if anybody was concerned that there was a leak, they would take that broom, hold it further out, and if you started to see smoldering, since you couldn't see the fire at that point, you would actually know that there was a leak, and you would know to stay away. So little tips and tricks are things that you learn here, but that is also a safety aspect that comes into play. You need to make sure that the workforce knows about this. The other interesting part about this, when it comes to training the workforce around zero emissions specifically, is that now everybody is affected. And we're not talking about just your maintenance techs, your operators, maybe supervisory personnel, but every single person from the C-suite all the way down to your newest hire are going to be affected in some way. Whether it just be safety and general idea of how the vehicles operate, a simple introduction, that's one thing. But those people still need to know what the vehicles are capable of and what the technology is really going to do. And a lot of it really does, again, come down to safety.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned that there is the challenge of taking people out of their day-to-day duties and responsibilities and putting them into training. And I can see that just amplified. If it's everybody in the organization has to have at least some level of awareness, that's a bit disruptive, isn't it?
Yeah. It can really, if you're trying to do it all at once, it can be really difficult to do all of that training. The upside, though, is, again, with a lot of the new technologies that are out there, we have access to getting that training to a larger audience than we ever have had before. So you don't necessarily have to take people out of their job. You can just send out an e-learning invite, a link, and say, I need you to take this class. Maybe it's a 5-minute class. It's an e-learning course. And then someone else who has already been previously qualified can follow up, ask some questions in person if that's something that's needed.
Sure.
With maintenance, you would have like OJT, for example. So on the job training, where you have someone who has gone through this training before, has been qualified, can verify and validate that you actually have understood the material and you're able to apply it to your job later.
Sure. How are transit agencies preparing for the operations and maintenance of their new fleet, given that this is such a huge transition in the industry?
They are, well, the upside is now they're starting to plan. Previously, the idea was we have new technology coming in because a lot of people didn't, and again, this is, the C-suite piece. There were a lot of leaders that didn't quite understand what the impact was.
Sure.
Smaller transit agencies that I've worked with before, they had said that they sort of did like a hiccup along the way. So their initial attempt to transition didn't work out so well because they were like, we'll just figure it out. It's a bus is a bus. All we really have to do is get in there and work on it.
Sure.
And then you would have a manufacturer come in. My team would come in when I was at Proterra, and we'd say, oh, no. You can't just figure out how something works when you have high voltage electricity, because there are dangers inherent with it. Excuse me. And to that point, you had people suddenly realize that they had to stop. They had to get the right PPE, get the right tools, get the right training out there. And so when they realized exactly the gravity of the situation of making that transition happen, even to the point of making sure that the vehicles were operating efficiently, they were getting the max range out of them. They realized that to accomplish this, they had to really put together a solid plan and think through exactly how they're going to roll out this training, how far out they can roll it out, what they're going to be able to do once the buses get on site, who's going to be responsible for parts of this. So a lot of that now is really kind of coming to play, and thankfully the FTA has requested that you have to put together a fleet transition plan whenever requesting low-no funding. So if you're putting in a grant proposal through the FTA for those low-no grant funds, you have to include your zero-emission fleet transition plan. And that's where, again, you've got others like myself who have had the opportunity to work with the industry and kind of see where the challenges are, see where a lot of the successes are as well. We can help you advise on what your plan needs to include for it to be successful and how you would want that plan to look for you to make that complete transition to zero emissions.
Are there like 5 key points to a plan, a successful plan, or what's the basic scope of it?
Okay, so specifically for a training plan, this is where, or sorry, for the workforce development piece of putting together a good plan, that's where I can talk about the most. From my standpoint, the first is identify the skills that are needed for the new technology. So a lot of that has been done by other experts. A lot of that has been done by the OEMs as well. There are skills that are already identified and ready to go, sort of like an entire list that's ready to go for most agencies as they plan for this transition at least. The next is to get a better idea of where you are. So typically this is where a skills gap analysis is going to be best. Analyze where you are currently as far as skills are concerned, and then start planning through putting together your fleet transition plan, so your workforce development plan.
Okay.
If I know where I am right now, and I know exactly where I need to be, what are the skills that I need to have to be able to do everything on my own, if that's your plan? If you want to maintain everything, great, but what type of skills are required to do that needs to be addressed. And then how do I train my employees to be able to do all of that work? The last part is identifying the funding opportunities. I almost always have to say this. Typically, there is, let me rephrase this. So with identifying the funding opportunities, there is almost always a lot more money out there than people recognize. And there's grant opportunities at a state level. There's grant opportunities at a federal level, sometimes even at a local level as well, when it comes to workforce development. This is one of the first times in my entire career where I don't think that I've ever had to worry about whether or not money was going to be available for training. And, I'm coming from a position where whenever the economy got tight, times got tight, money got tight, the first thing to go was training. So you didn't really have to worry about your job going away in transit because you were often, protected in that way, maybe unionized or whatever the role was. They weren't going to cut you, but they weren't going to give you anything to expand, even though they needed you to do more training. So there was always that challenge that came along with it. But now with the additional 5% that's on top of low-no funding to start, that just makes things easy for most agencies to transition to zero emissions and put together a training plan. The other part of it too is that when you just as simply as typing in workforce development grants, every single time that I do that, like once a week, I'm always just looking up, what the stats are. At minimum, there's almost always 1,500 grants available.
Oh my God.
Now, granted, they're not all for transit, but that's just from the federal standpoint.
Wow.
You can get creative with grant opportunities as well. There is, I like to use the example of the West Coast Center of Excellence. So Lauren Skyver, who was previously with Sunline Transit, she had a brilliant idea to expand the training program that they had and really just kind of make it a hydrogen training hub and also partly a battery electric hub as well and expand. But she was in a tight spot because she really didn't have the funds at Sunline Transit to kind of turn the West Coast Center of Excellence into a regional training facility, right? So she started pursuing all sorts of grant opportunities. She got creative with how she was engaging with the mayor and the governor of California, the mayor of what is it, Palm Springs, yeah, and then the governor of California. So trying to engage both offices and just see if there was an opportunity to get funding, and she had actually secured some in that way. And then there were other, again, grant opportunities that she jumped on. That really made a big difference in Sunline's ability to not only train its own workforce and expand their training program, but also roll it out and make it available to others, which then further brings me up to that last sort of topic or bullet point here to make sure that you've got a well-rounded training plan. you need to identify the resources as well, whether or not you will be able to do the training or whether or not you have to sort of farm it out, contract it out. I always personally like to see agencies that are investing in themselves. If they have the capacity to be able to do their own training, it makes a big difference because they know exactly what they're seeing with their vehicles. They know how their fleet operates. So the moment that they can sort of take that information, their experience, and roll it back into their own training, it proves that it's going to have a better result. If they do have to work with partners, that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that either. Just make sure that you've got the right material for your partners to train the way that you need them to. So I had mentioned the ZEB training standards that were through APTA. That is something that is an excellent resource to start. You can hand that right to a courseware developer, to a community college, a tech school, whoever you're partnering with, and they can build courseware around that. You should still take some time to, review what they're putting together and make sure it fits your needs. But all of those objectives, all of those goals that we have included in those standards are relevant to what every zero-emission bus technician would need to use. So specifically on the operations side, while the standards aren't exactly written for this yet, there is still an emphasis on efficient operation of the vehicles. You're going to get better range if the drivers understand how to use regen appropriately, how to plan out their stops. These are things that you're going to want to work with, again, whoever is doing your training. If you are partnering and contracting that out, you want to make sure that they are also training your operators to make sure that they know how to drive those vehicles efficiently.
I remember when we were at APTA, the APTA Expo, and how you had mentioned that there were these partnership opportunities, which I was just completely unaware of, that the College of Technology or other institutions would be available to help with something like this. Is that commonly known in the mass transit industry?
It's yes and no. So there has previously been a little bit of difficulty with getting community colleges to always support workforce development programs and training in transit. That's not always the case. It's sort of like an anecdotal piece of information where, yes, there have been agencies that have reached out and have had difficulty, securing training because maybe the community college or honestly even the universities just didn't have the space to be able to expand and really do what they wanted. Sometimes it was another issue where the agency was expecting to have a pipeline, and the people that were taking the class really never bothered to look at transit. They went off somewhere else and they worked for like Penske or something, for example. So the partnership would end for that reason. We're seeing lately there's sort of reinvigorated energy, if you will, that's being pumped back into making those partnerships happen, because a lot of the community colleges, a lot of the tech schools, a lot of the universities are recognizing that there is overlap with what they've been teaching around theory, around manufacturing, around the personal vehicles and the fleet vehicles. There's enough overlap that they can really help more than one industry and sort of still use the same information that they've had before. University of Michigan is a great example here. And so is Kettering University in Flint, since I had been using them as the example lately. Kettering is setting up an entire hydrogen theory training program for Flint MTA's technicians. And that partnership is just starting. It's going to expand significantly. Flint MTA is going to be taking a lot of their training and expanding in-house when it comes to the technician side. They already do a significant amount of training for the operators. Everything from, because their operators are not only just transit bus operators, but also paratransit and fleet vehicle operators as well. So their operations training staff will go out of their way to teach them not only how to drive the bus, not only how to get their CDL, but how to properly install your child seats. Make sure that it's installed properly in a car, because they transport families to and from hospitals from time to time if they need to. Also to and from the grocery store. This was a program that they had kicked off as well. So that is one of those things where right now they have that partnership with Kettering for the technical information, and as they continue to expand out their capacity to do technical training in-house, Kettering is going to support them and then also build some of their courseware. So there's a lot of really good work that's going on in this example, at least with
Cool.
for-profit colleges, places like UTI, like Wyotech, any of the other for-profit institutions out there. They saw that there was an opportunity as well to sort of jump in and offer training programs. I don't know that the partnerships are really going in the direction that everybody is expecting. But which is, they really want to be able to support and create technicians that are specifically for transit. But I don't know that there's any agencies that are about to really execute on that. I know that they have an interest in creating that pipeline, but when it comes to that kind of direct partnership, a lot of agencies are looking for something that's a little more cost effective.
Sure. Okay. Can you walk us through how training is typically structured in the transit industry and what changes you are heralding as they transition into ZEB fleets?
Sure. So traditionally, training in all of transit is classroom training. So you have someone that needs training, whether it be a maintenance tech or an operator. You take them out of whatever position they have for a short period of time, and by that usually it's about a week. You're lucky if you get a day at a time or something. It's kind of tough to really get short bits of information to a lot of your workforce in these positions. And instead, they kind of sit down there looking at something like 3-4 days at a time, and that means you just take somebody out of that spot for a week. The downside, though, is that ends up impacting your ability to make pullout, right? So if you don't have enough drivers and you can't actually get the buses on the road because they're in training, then you're gonna usually prioritize getting the buses on the road and making service rather than training anyone. And this gets it's worse if we start looking at the fact that right now the workforce is typically about 25% understaffed in transit.
Oh, wow.
So we're always on a crunch here. We're always looking for additional drivers, always looking for additional techs. There's help that's needed, and honestly, the pay is very good in a lot of these areas too. You've got starting wages for some technicians that are in like $30 an hour range plus benefits, which is really good. That said, if you can't actually train your employees, though, then you start running into issues with being able to do their job, obviously, but then more so that's exacerbated further when you start running into new technologies. So zero emissions coming around, that's just going to be a scenario where you won't be able to get the training, and you're almost putting yourself behind the ball. What is starting to change, and this is what I'm excited about, is you finally have people that are a little more receptive to utilizing the technology that's out there that we already have available to us. And by that, I mean our phone. So starting there, if I'm willing to engage with my employees and my workforce and sort of suggest we'll pay you for an hour of overtime if on your own time after you have clocked out, you accomplish these 3 or 4 different e-learning modules that are accessible through an app on your phone. Maybe the app is specifically for your transit agency, but using these micro learning moments, if you will, where you can get the training out there, you can start touching on certain topics that really need to be covered. So if you haven't done any safety training in, let's say, 6 months, and all of a sudden your drivers are in a position where they're not planning out their stops properly, for whatever reason, they're sort of a little too close to the car in front. You start to notice a trend of there have been some rear end collisions lately. And while there isn't a lot of damage, it's still something that you'd like to mitigate. One of the ways to do that is simply roll out a relatively short micro learning module, 30 seconds, a minute and a half, whatever, that they can take either as they clock in or as they clock out at the end of the day. This way you can get some of that classroom learning, some of that classroom training out in their hands the moment that you need it to. The other part of doing it this way, or the other upside of doing it this way, is you're breaking it down into bite-sized bits of information for them to process and then immediately start to utilize. So you see that incremental change kind of happen at a faster rate than if you overload somebody with 40 hours worth of training in a week that they only paid maybe 10% attention to. So retaining that information is going to be a big piece of it. The other side as well is if you don't have access to trainers, that's a huge challenge. If you don't have training staff, but you still need to get the training out there, again, remote learning or e-learning helps at least mitigate part of that challenge where you can get the training to the right person. So anything that would have been in classroom, you can start talking through virtually. The other piece of this is still going to be the OJT and the follow-up. So now that I have, let's stick with the technicians on this topic here. Now that I've done my my in classroom training, just remotely in this case, I've gone through the presentations. How do I know that I can actually do the job or just do the task that I'm supposed to be learning about? How do I know that my employees can do that? How do I know that the workforce can do that in general? And for something specifically focused on safety criticality, right? If we're looking at being able to test for the absence of voltage, high voltage in a battery electric bus, for example, if we're doing lockout tagout, you still need somebody that is qualified, but the OJT portion of this can be quantified, if you will, where you can say, well, I only have to do, maybe an hour's worth of OJT with someone, but that sort of correlates to, let's say, a 4-hour class that they normally would have had to sit in on. So you've essentially taken what could have been, a 4-hour class, 2 hours of presentation, 2 hours of out on the shop floor with a group of people. And the reason it's taking 2 hours is because one instructor has to handle 8 to 10 people, right? Now you have one other qualified individual who maybe doesn't have to be an instructor, but is qualified, has a check sheet or has some objectives that they have to work through with this person who is essentially their student at that time, and make sure that they are able to actually do the job, right? Apply what they just learned. It takes a lot of effort, sort of, if you will, and a lot of that traditional learning, and kind of transitions it into a way that we can continue to educate, continue to train, continue to learn, and move forward as we're making this transition. So we're better situating ourselves to take the idea of what we are working on right now and immediately start to apply it.
Absolutely. And that when you talk about condensing that time as well for everybody that's in the training process, it's honestly, my head goes money savings. Like that is has a huge financial impact, right?
It does. Yeah. There's a ton of fringe benefits to doing something like that too. The faster that you get the training out there and the faster that it's actually being applied and applied correctly, the faster you're going to see benefits like savings in maintenance costs. If the buses are being maintained properly from the start, and you're reducing the amount of wear and tear on them, then that saves you money overall, right? So you may have invested a little bit of money in making sure that you have this new equipment now. And by equipment, I don't mean the buses, I actually mean the training. So the software, whatever platform it is that you're going to use, that eventually will kind of pay dividends over time as you end up seeing the benefits of the training actually roll out.
James, what are the consequences of inadequate or improper training?
The consequences are sometimes as simple as you have increased wear and tear on the vehicles, but when it comes to ZEBs, they can be a little more dire. So we're looking at battery electric, which is high voltage at this point. There is high voltage on the hydrogen fuel cells because they're also technically battery electric. And in those instances, you have a higher risk of electrocution, of someone getting hurt, and not only hurt, but also people dying. The same to be said for the facilities and the equipment. So on the hydrogen fueling side, if you have an electrolyzer, if you have your own tanks, and people haven't been properly trained on how to identify the risks and potential indicators of a hydrogen leak, what that might mean, how they may be hurt. You could be looking at the difference between one person that's just maybe like hurt, which we're not looking for in the first place. You don't want anybody hurt, but it would be one person versus hundreds potentially, because again, with hydrogen, you have but you have the potential or the risk of a blast incident. You have the potential or a risk of a leak where maybe it's not a blast, but it is someone getting hurt because there is a hydrogen fire, but an H2 fire is invisible. You don't know that you're kind of on fire, if you will, until everything starts to burn. So there's that risk. And that's kind of what happens in some of these cases. If we have new technology and it's not trained on properly, we run the risk of others being hurt.
We talked a little bit about the standards that apply to the mass transit industry, specifically with ZEB maintenance processes. Can you talk a little bit about the OSHA standards that would apply generally to this?
Sure. So in this case, OSHA 1910 technically applies here. It's a relatively large governing document, but it does apply. One of the reasons that I point that out is how we qualify individuals to be able to do certain tasks on this. And usually there's always a conversation about who's qualified, how they're qualified, and so on. But in this case, it's focused around like lockout, tagout, typically. So how do I make sure that this vehicle has been de-energized? How do I make sure that everything is shut down, that I've isolated as much as I possibly can to reduce the risk to myself or others when doing any sort of maintenance work on this. So that would be the 1910 aspect of it. The other governing document is the NFPA 70E. So you mentioned generally, and I'm glad that you did. None of these were written specifically for ZEBs. They were written as a generality. So 70E is typically around commercial and usually around like commercial safety, electrical safety.
Sure.
But this applies to a lot of the same systems and theory, if you will, that is already being put on these new buses. So the new technology still there's a bit of overlap between them, which means that we're utilizing these. There's always the possibility that at some point in the future, we may see some governing body come out with something specifically written for ZEBs and infrastructure and how the safety needs to be applied to those technologies, right? But for now, we have two very, very well-written governing documents to help improve safety.
This is the standard 1910 subpart D. That's what Spika operates under. And I suppose I can just share an image real quick. Where Spika enters the scene really with the mass transit industry is in the OSHA standard. That's where we play. We provide upper level access. And what we're finding is with the maintenance and all the things you've been talking about that have to be considered with the maintenance of these new buses, access to the rooftop seems to be almost like an afterthought. Is that something you're finding as well as you talk with different transit agencies?
Absolutely. And it's not necessarily because it's not like it's intentional that they're overlooking it. It's more that they find themselves restricted in the fact that they're using either old facilities that didn't have any. There was barely enough clearance for them to get on the roof in the first place, let alone lift the bus. Sometimes you have facilities where the buses are so tight to each other that there's no way you could put a ladder next to them. So there was no way to get on the roof. It's definitely not one of those things that you like to see, but it has become pretty common. One thing that is absolutely a benefit to the additional workforce development funds that I was mentioning before, that 5% on top of Lono, technically speaking, based on what the FTA's guidance has said, as long as there is a training piece tied to like a brand new building, for example, if you have a classroom in there that is going to be dedicated towards training and workforce development, you can use those funds. So there's no penalty for using those funds to build a new shop that now would have the proper safety equipment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's when we speak with people in transit agencies, most of them are working with an old facility that they're hoping to use some of this money for to build it out to something that can actually work with the new buses.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
awesome.
I'm
Well,
very
James,
glad to hear that.
yeah.
It's great that you, first off, it's great that you have that platform available, that you have the scaffolding and that entire system. That's the way that that's designed is perfect for what is on top of those buses. And I've had the opportunity to use them, at Proterra, for example. They were really helpful there. Some of the Proterra buses had the batteries on the roof, and it made it so that it was easily accessible and safe. And honestly, my favorite part of it was I've been on some scaffolding before, and I can tell you that the difference between your your platform and what I've used before and what I have commonly been on is yours actually feels stable. I don't feel like I'm gonna
Yeah.
like shake off the roof of the bus if I try and hop back on the scaffolding there. So again, thank you for everything you guys do with providing that level of safety and access for manufacturing and shops as well.
Well, Proterra played a big role in launching us into this industry. They're the reason that we are in mass transit, and they've been a great partner to us. So I'm glad. It's when we speak with people about upper level access, a lot of them do think about rickety scaffolds that are just terrible to use. They're terrible to use, and oftentimes they're steel, they're dirty, they're heavy, and they're just not ideal. So I'm really glad that you actually use a Spika stand. You know what you're talking about. The last question here, James. What advice would you give to folks that are embarking on this transition?
Start planning. That's always the first thing I say is if you don't have a plan, it's going to be tough. I'm going to offer two more bits of information here. Engage your frontline workforce through some sort of committee. It makes a big difference. If they feel like they have a voice, if they are empowered to actually make change and communicate to you that, hey, we don't have proper training on this, we need to get that done. Or the buses are acting strange lately for some reason. We're not getting the normal range on a Tuesday. Why Tuesdays? It's something you can look into, right? And that last bit of information, or what I would suggest, is start reaching out to colleagues in the industry, not just like people like myself who do this type of work, but other agencies are really excited to share their experiences. King County Metro is a prime example of this. AC Transit, Sunline Transit, a lot of places in the West Coast, which shouldn't be a surprise considering that they were very much leading the way to zero emission when adopting the new technology. But they have authored a lot of the studies that they've done. They've made them available to people. They're opening up their training teams and their training departments to other transit agencies to invite them out and go through their training programs as well.
Wow.
So that if you don't have the resources to be able to do training in-house, you can send any of your technicians or drivers out to those locations to receive the same level of quality training. So there's a ton out there. There's support for you. And as you're, I'm sure, starting to learn, transit is really, what's the best way to describe this? We're like one big family. We're really well connected in that way. I was just going to say well connected, but that's kind of the wrong way to describe it. We communicate with each other. We support each other. The moment that, one person is struggling somewhere else, 10 other people will often come to their aid and support them because that's just what we do in transit. So please, again, feel free to reach out to anybody, myself, or if I can't, put anybody else in contact, then I know somebody else that at least has the right answer. So.
James, how can people reach you if they're looking for some help with this transition?
Sure. So let me go ahead and share my screen just for a moment. So if anybody has any questions or would like some support, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is all stored in this QR code here. So if you scan that with your phone, it'll pop up and give you everything you need to contact me. Otherwise, feel free to reach out at james@tech-zeb.com. Check out my website, www.tech-zeb.com, or feel free to give me a call at 443-844-1804.
Wonderful.
Just real quick before we drop,
Yeah.
I have two resources that I've kind of been sending around lately, which is the APTA ZEB training standards, just a link for it. And the other is they're building out the repository a little bit further, but there's a website called skillscommons.org, I believe. They are
that.
they're basically a free repository for training material.
Cool.
So if anybody is struggling to find themselves in a spot where they just need to figure out where to start, this is a good place for them. So if you're comfortable sharing that as well, at least the information is out there.
Yes, absolutely. Well, James, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.